Everyone, it is Brother Aaron from Got a Minute. Here we are again. It's a live stream, and this is titled 40 Reasons for the Rapture Before the 7-Year Tribulation. Before we start, Jesus saves, bro. Jesus saves, bro. And you got to get tight with Christ. You got to enter into a relationship with Him. You have to believe that His blood is enough. His blood is the new covenant. The covenant of grace, the covenant of mercy, the covenant of forgiveness. He is your kinsman redeemer, and he is coming soon. And so, if you want to be in Jesus' good books, you accept that free gift of salvation that He gave to you. And so, this is a Rapture channel. We are waiting, and we are hoping that He's coming real soon. Well, we know He's coming soon, and so we just need to be reminded of all the amazing things in Scripture. There's typology, there's patterns, and so we got 40 reasons why the rapture happens before the 7 years. So some of this is going to be talking about why it's 7 years, and some of this is going to be talking about why the rapture happens before that. Hey, everybody on the chat, good to see you all. That's great. So the title speaks for itself. It says there's 40, so there's a lot of information here. So I'm going to share this on my screen here, and we're going to get into it. And I'm not going to thoroughly read through every single thing here. Otherwise, we'll be here for a very long time, and we're not going to do that. But I'll try and be as thorough as I can here, and talk through these talking points. So, yeah, I believe it's in patterns, it's in typology, it's all from Genesis to Revelation. All those books of the Bible, they all play a part in understanding that makes sense that we fly before the 7 years. And so this chart or this text is on my community wall. I tried to update it and add more text, and it wouldn't let me. Darn. So I don't know how I'm going to do that, but you can check out my community wall from about 2 weeks ago, and I've got most of this text in there. So we're going to go through this. Hopefully this is going to encourage you and something that you're going to be looking forward to. This is something that we should be looking forward to. We should be looking forward and excited to see Jesus. We shouldn't be terrified of what's coming around the corner. That makes no sense. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, it says, for verse 18, it says, "Therefore comfort one another with these words." And so hopefully this video will be a huge comfort to you. If you're new to the faith, or you're new to the channel, hopefully you enjoy the content here that I'm going to put out. And again, thank you guys for hanging out. Thank you for all your support. There's so many different ways to support. Even just thank you for being here. That's an awesome support. Leaving comments, talking, thumbs up. There's so many different ways to show support. We're all leaning on each other. We're all brothers and sisters wanting to be encouraged. We encourage each other in so many different ways. So here it is. Of course, there's more than 40 points on this page, but I just said 40 because that's kind of I've got 40 kind of main essential points, and then there's branches off those points. So it's like you could almost argue there's like 100 points, but let's get into it. The rapture and the 7 year typology. So the first point is there's a day for a year in terms of rebellion. So the people that are not in Christ are essentially in rebellion to the Messiah, rebellion to Jesus. And so in Numbers 14:34, this is when Caleb and Joshua came back with a good report, but the other ones did not. And it says in Numbers 14:34, it says, "According to the numbers of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years, and you shall know my rejection." So I'm reading the Bible out of my hard copy here, and you can see it on the screen, that a day is for 1 year in terms of rebellion or sin. And Ezekiel 4 verse 6 essentially says the same thing. So I'll read that verse. And this is kind of going to outline a lot of the typology throughout the Torah, once you understand this. Ezekiel 4 verse 6, it says, "And when you have completed them, lie again on your right side. Then you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have laid on you a day for each year." So what we have here right off the bat is a day equals 1 year. So when we go through the Torah, when it's 7 days for somebody with leprosy, and 7 days if you touch a dead body, and 7 days for this, and 7 days for that, you could see that the typology of 7 years is all over the place. But that's point one, is a day for a year. You can pretty much apply 7 days all over the Bible to that kind of idea. All right. So now that you know that a day is a year, let's go to point number 2. The Bible says that we are priests in Revelation 1, verse 6. I can read that for you. I'll go over there in my hard copy. Revelation 1, verse 6. And he has made us kings and priests to his God and Father. To him be glory and dominion forever. Amen. So this is the greetings to the 7 churches. And so he's telling us that we're kings and priests. Well, in 1 Peter 2, verse 9, just bouncing over there, well, it says that we are priests that must be consecrated. And well, we are priests. It doesn't say that we have to be consecrated in that, but I'll use my computer version here. I'll probably find it faster. I'm trying to dig around here. 1 Peter, where are you? There you are. 1 Peter 2, verse 9. And it says, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light. So 1 Peter 2, verse 9 says that we are priests. Revelation 1, verse 6 says that we are priests. Revelation 5, verse 9 is the priests are singing a new song when the Lamb opens the scroll. So we're there before the Lamb opens the scroll. We're there singing a song before the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, opens the seals. Like, we're there. We're praising him. You are worthy to open the scroll. And again, Jesus is the only kinsman redeemer. Jesus is the only one that is worthy to open the scroll. And so we're there saying, Jesus, you are worthy, in Revelation 5:9. And then, of course, in Leviticus chapter 8, what we see here is there's the consecration of the priests. And like I said, we are priests. And how many days does it say we have to be consecrated? Well, at the end of Leviticus chapter 8, and Moses said to Aaron and his sons, boil the flesh at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and eat it there with the bread that is in the basket of consecration offerings, as I commanded, saying, Aaron and his sons shall eat it. What remains of the flesh and of the bread you shall burn with fire, and you shall not go outside the door of the tabernacle of meeting for 7 days. 7 days, but remember, a day is like a year. So you can't go outside the tabernacle of meeting for 7 days until the days of your consecration are ended. For 7 days he shall consecrate you, as he has done this day. So the Lord has commanded to do, to make atonement for you. Therefore you shall stay at the door of the tabernacle of meeting day and night for 7 days, and keep the charge of the Lord, so that you may not die. For so I have been commanded. So Aaron and his sons did all the things that the Lord had commanded by the hand of Moses. So we've got 7 days is 7 years right there. So when the door is shut, no one comes in and no one goes out for 7 days. That's a big deal. We're priests. We must be consecrated for 7 days. And a day is like a year. Okay, third point. Point number 3. Israel is unclean for 7 days because she bore a male child. All right. So, according to the law, we'll read Leviticus 12 first. Leviticus 12, verse 2. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a woman has conceived and borne a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. As in the days of her customary impurity, she shall be unclean. So that's the law. That's the Torah in Leviticus chapter 12, verse 2. Well, Revelation 12 is talking about a woman giving birth to a male child. But remember, that is a future event that has not happened yet. Okay? So why is that? Well, before you read Revelation 12, verse 5, let's read the first verse in the book of Revelation. It says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants things which must shortly take place. And he sent and signified it by his angel to his servant John, who bore witness of the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, to all the things that he saw. Blessed is he who reads and those who hears the words of this prophecy and keeps those things which are written, for the time is near. So everything in the book of Revelation are things to come. Nothing about the book of Revelation are things that already happened. So what we're seeing in the book of Revelation, chapter 12 in particular, is we're seeing a woman giving birth to a male child. That male child is the church, in my understanding. Well, in Leviticus chapter 12, if a woman gives birth to a male child, they're unclean for 7 days. Well, the woman in Revelation 12 is none other than Israel. So Israel is giving birth to the church, and the church is caught up in Revelation chapter 12. But she is unclean. That means she's got to stay outside of the camp for 7 days. Now, it might not be outside the camp, but we'll see some other typology with that. But essentially, she's unclean for 7 days. That's point number 3. So now we're going to go move to point number 4. We're talking about leprosy now. So, like leprosy, we are spiritually unclean for, you guessed it, 7 days without Christ. So we're in the Torah, God's law. God's going to keep his own law. It says Leviticus in chapter 13, 4 through 6. But if the bright spot is white on the skin of his body and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and its hair has not turned white, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the sore 7 days. How about that? 7 days. What are the odds of that? And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. And indeed, if the sore appears to be as white as it was, and the sore has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him another 7 days. Then the priest shall examine him again on the 7th day. And indeed, if the sore is faded, and the sore has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. So there's your 4th 7th day thing here. And a day is like a year. So, I wrote here 7 days for leprosy, and spiritual leprosy is without Christ. We are not clean without Christ, and so if you're rejecting Christ, you're in a sense kind of giving yourself leprosy in a way. Okay, so point number 5 is disobedience. Disobedience brings 7 times more punishment for sin and rebellion. In Leviticus 26, it's mentioned 4 times. If you're in rebellion, there is a factor of 7 that is applied to you. And it's not a factor of 3.5 or 14 or 11. It's a factor of 7. So that's Leviticus 26, verse 18 and 21 and 24 and 28. 7 times, 7 times, 7 times, 7 times. Okay, the 6th point, 7 days or 7 years for rebellion. So here's our 6th point. And we read that in Numbers 14, a day for a year. And if you go back 2 chapters before that, we've got a story of Miriam. And we'll say that right now. So that's Numbers chapter 12, 13 through 16. Essentially what's going on here is Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. That's Numbers chapter 12. And so Miriam actually means rebellion in her name. And so what ends up happening is Miriam becomes leprous. And that's verse 10. So, and when the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, suddenly Miriam became leprous. And if you skip down to verse 13, which is what I've got highlighted here. So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "Please heal her, O God, I pray." Then the Lord said to Moses, "If her father had but spit in her face, would she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp 7 days, and afterwards she may be received again." So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey till Miriam was brought in again. So Miriam was shut out of the camp, you guessed it, for 7 days, but we find 2 chapters later that a day is like a year. How about that? That's amazing. So, if you're in rebellion of Christ, you're outside the camp for 7 days. Now, isn't it interesting too that Moses was an intercessor for Miriam? So Moses interceded, and he was like, "Hey, can you just heal her, oh God?" And so Moses is kind of acting like a type of Christ there, interceding for Miriam. That's an interesting thing there too. But we'll move on. So hopefully this is encouraging you. I think this is a great study, and this is when you get through this whole study, you're like, this is really encouraging. Yeah, pretty solid stuff here. So this is the next point. Point number 7, Judges 6 verse 1. 7 years Israel was delivered into the hand of Midian. So I can go over to Judges chapter 1. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Midians for 7 years. So prophecy is like pattern. When you see patterns, you see prophecy. If the Lord handed over Israel to the Midians for 7 years, that's very likely something like that will happen again. Because if it's happened once before, it'll happen again in a different way. So even though prophecy, a lot of prophecy has been fulfilled, that also means that those prophecies or things like it could happen again in relation to the end times. So anyway, that's the 7th point. The 8th point is 7 days wait. Ezekiel sent to warn rebellious Israel. This is in Ezekiel chapter 3. And here we go. And it's around verse 12 and on. Then the Spirit lifted me up. This is Ezekiel here talking. And I heard behind me a great thunderous voice. Blessed is the glory of the Lord from his place. I also heard the noise of the wings of the living creatures that touch one another, and the noise of the wheels beside them, and a great thunderous noise. So the Spirit lifted me up and took me away. How about that? And I went in bitterness in the heat of my spirit, but the hand of the Lord was strong upon me. Then I came to the captives at Tel Aviv, who dwelt by the river Shabar, and I sat where they sat and remained there, astonished among them for 7 days. Wow, Ezekiel was astonished and remained there for 7 days. But notice before he sat there for 7 days, the Spirit lifted him up and took him away. The Spirit lifted him up and took him away. That's Ezekiel before his 7 days of hanging around. There is a pattern once again of 7. All right, so that's perfect. The number 9 point here that I've got is 7 days of silence at the beginning of Job's trouble. Well, how about that? So Job, Satan and God are having a conversation, and both in chapter 1 and 2, you kind of see this pattern. We talked about this a little bit, but I've written down specifically Job 2:13. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. So what we have in Job is, in Job chapter 1, we have 4 words of escape. There's always a messenger that comes back to tell Job that something bad happened, but there's all these guys that came back to say, hey, I've escaped, but I'm telling you something bad here. But then in Job chapter 2, we have another conversation. It might even be the same conversation with God and Satan. I'm not quite sure how that works out, but the big thing is Job's friends are with him, and again, they sit with him for 7 days and nights, and this is when his tribulation really begins, and he goes through many chapters of like asking all these questions, and it's hard, and these guys are challenging him, and they don't even know why all this torment has came on Job's life. But the big thing is, before they had all those chapters of conversation, they sat there for 7 days and nights. How about that? There's your typology in Job. There's your typology in Ezekiel. There's your typology in Judges. It's everywhere. Okay. So the 10th point, we're going to go over to Samson, the book of Judges. And by the way, Job is arguably the oldest book in the Bible, too. And so it's right there. It's everywhere. But anyway, we're going to go to Judges here. So Judges 14 is Samson gives them the riddle. He gives them a riddle. And what is he? Well, it's a 7-day riddle, you know. But I'll skip down to near the end of Judges 14. It says, verse 17. Now she had wept on him the 7 days while their feast lasted. And it happened on the 7th day that he told her, because she pressed him so much. Then he explained the riddle to the sons of her people. So the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would have solved my riddle. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of their men. But the idea is, Samson gave them a riddle, and it was meant to be answered after 7 days. And so he brought destruction on the 7th day, which is a representation of Jesus coming at the second coming after 7 years to destroy the people that plowed with his heifer in a way. And so actually, he's called Israel the harlot in Jeremiah and in all sorts of books, the heifer, the harlot, the adulteress, and all this kind of stuff. So God is going to deal with her, but then he's also going to deal with all the people that, how do I say this, interacted with her in that way. And so here we have the story of Samson, and in this story we have a real perfect typology of 7 days through his riddle with the lion and the honey. And so that's point number 10. So now we're on point number 11. I don't have these numbers. Hopefully I'm saying it right here. 7-day feast of Esther. So Esther 1 verse 5. Esther is, the first queen in Esther refuses to come before the king. And then Esther eventually marries the king. But what we have right off the bat, Esther 1 verse 5, it says, and when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So there's 7 days. 7 days. And keep in mind, there's 2 female books in the Bible. There's a Ruth and there's an Esther. Esther was a Jewish person that came to the king, and Ruth was a Gentile bride that was grafted into Israel. But nevertheless, we still have a 7-day pattern here as well. That's perfect. So I don't know if that was point 11. Let's just assume that was 11. So now we're going on to point 12. 7 days or years for touching a dead body. We are all guilty for crucifying Christ. Right. So, let's see here. I think I might have edited this, and I might have, okay, that's what's going on here. I see what I did. I added the same stuff twice. Okay. Numbers 19 should really be on the top of this, so I'll have to edit it another time. But Numbers 19 is talking about a dead body. And specifically, verse 11, and in that area, he who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean for 7 days. Okay, so if you touch a dead body, you're unclean for 7 days. And you can read the rest of that chapter. There's a lot of 7 days in there that mentions it like many times. I think it mentions it 7 times, actually. Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Or it looks like it talks about 7 times in Numbers 19. But essentially, if you touch a dead body, you're unclean for 7 days. Okay. So spiritually, in Galatians 2:20, we've been crucified with Christ. But by the grace of God, we don't have to go through 7 years of punishment because we've chosen to be grafted in to the kingdom of God when we accept Jesus' invitation. And again, I wrote this a little bit out of order. we've got this other theme too. I think I'll skip those other verses for now, but I want to mention Acts chapter 2, verse 36. And this is specifically Acts 2, verse 22. So this is Peter, and he says, "Men of Israel, hear these words." And he goes on to tell them about Jesus and the whole lineage thing. And then in verse 36, it says, "Therefore let all the house of Israel know surely that God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ." So Israel, you crucified Christ. Right? So I wrote it again over here. Israel, you crucified Christ, the Lord Jesus Christ. So, I got to fix that too. This is my most recent edit, and I got to fix that. But Israel is guilty for crucifying Christ. Israel is guilty for touching a dead body. How many days are you unclean if you touch a dead body? It's 7. 7 days. So they're unclean for 7 years. They're also a woman giving birth to a male child. So they're unclean for 7 days, which in other words is 7 years. These other verses, Hosea 9 verse 4, Jeremiah 16 verse 7 is, it might be too complicated for me to say this right now. So I'll just say it super quick. You might not understand, but there's something called the bread of mourning. The bread of mourning. You would eat bread when somebody dies. And so in Hosea 9, God calls Ephraim the dead person in the house of the bread of mourning. And Jeremiah 16 verse 7 talks about that as well, about eating bread when somebody is dead. So there's a little bit of a rabbit trail there, but I just thought I'd throw those on for people that really want to do an aggressive study on that. Okay, I'll have to go back and edit that, like I said. Okay, so the next point is 7 days and 7 years outside the camp for rebellion. So Numbers 31, that's 1 through 24. So what's going on here is, well, the whole chapter is really, it's the vengeance on the Midianites. To summarize what's going on here, Moses was like, "What are you guys doing? Why are you guys hanging out with those Midianites?" And so they went to go kill the Midianites. And there's a point in there where it says, after you kill those people, you got to be outside the camp for 7 days. That's Numbers 31, verse 19. "And as for you, remain outside the camp for 7 days. Whoever has killed any person and whoever has touched any slain, purify yourselves and your captives on the 3rd day and on the 7th day." So there's a purification process after you kill those people. So that's in Numbers 31. So what happened in Numbers 31, it's actually a response to what happened in Numbers 25, when Israel played the harlot with Moab. So Israel played the harlot with the women in Moab. They sacrificed to other gods. And so because of this, they ended up having this occasion in Numbers 31. And it says here, "Now therefore kill every male among the little ones and kill every woman." That's in Numbers 31. But then after you do some killing, stay outside the camp for 7 days. So there's your other typology of 7 days right there. So it's a lot of information. Okay, so the next area that we've got, this is probably point number 14 or 15. Let's call this 15. 7 years of famine on the land. So 2 Kings comes right after 2 Kings 4 and verse 8. 2 Kings chapter 4 and chapter 8 come after the rapture of Elijah. Again, so 7 years of famine on the land come after the rapture of Elijah. So Elijah gets taken up in 2 Kings chapter 2. Then we have this typology in 2 Kings 4:35, which says, "He returned and walked back and forth in the house, and again went up and stretched himself out on him. Then the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes." Then we have in 2 Kings 8:1 through 2, this is the mention of the 7-year famine. So Elijah gets raptured before the healing of this this child, in which there's a sneezing going on 7 times, and then there's a 7-year famine. Well, Elijah is a typology of the rapture, of course, and there's 7 years of famine that follow him after he leaves. That's pretty perfect. So we'll call that point number 15, even though I'm kind of lost now in terms of my numbers. 7 years of famine on the land in Genesis 41. This is Joseph. He goes to Egypt. There's going to be 7 years of plenty. Then there's going to be 7 years of famine. That's another typology. That's plain enough. We'll leave it there. Next typology, point number 17, 7 times to wash away leprosy. So this is 2 Kings chapter 5. Naaman has leprosy. He wants some healing, and he's told to go wash 7 times in the Jordan. Go wash 7 times in the Jordan. 7 times. Perfect. Typologies everywhere. That's great. Next pattern. We're into the book of Joshua. 7 patterns at the destruction of Jericho. And that's all in Joshua chapter 6, the destruction of Jericho. The 7 days to walk around Jericho. There's 7 priests. There's 7 trumpets. There's 7 times walk on the 7th day. 7's all over the place. And then, of course, that's all there. Then they enter. The next pattern that we see here is 7 years between the crossing the Jordan and receiving the promised land. There's a lot of history here. You got to combine a couple of verses. But Joshua 14 tells us Caleb age is about 85 when he inherits Hebron. And Deuteronomy chapter 2 verse 14, Caleb age is 78, sent from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. So Caleb enters the age at 84, and and when you do some math, you can figure it out that there's a 7-year gap there. There's a 7-year gap from when they crossed over the Jordan to when they divvied up the land, about 7 years later. So that's perfect. There's another 7-year typology. Perfect. Okay, next. 7 years, a release of debt at the end of every 7 years. Deuteronomy 15, this is the Torah. And it says, 15, 1 through 6. This is the debts that are canceled every 7 years. There's a release on the Shemitah year. So at the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release of debts. It says that right off the bat in Deuteronomy 15. Well, when you're in rebellion, you're in debt to the Lord. You're in debt to the Lord when you're in rebellion. So you owe him 7 years. If you reject the Messiah now, you owe him 7 years. That's part of the law here. Okay. We're probably around point 21, more or less. The next point is Rahab, the Gentile, taken out before the 7 years. And this is in Joshua 6:23. Rahab and her family are taken out in Joshua 6, verse 23. And then it's the 7 years of war, like I just told you about Caleb there, the 7 years. Well, we got this idea where the Gentile is taken out, and then 7 years to take the land. How about that? We got Noah. Noah leaves before the flood. Genesis chapter 7. Noah leaves before the destruction. 7 each of every clean animal. 7 days on the ark before the flood. 7 days of flights for the dove, etc. There's a lot of 7 patterns in the story of Noah. Well, how about that? And I don't know if I've written this later, but Enoch was taken before the flood. He was just taken, just like Elijah was taken before the 7 years of the famine. So Enoch was taken before the flood. Perfect. The typology is there too. There's 2 witnesses for that. The next is Lot leaves before destruction, Genesis 19. And I'll add one more point to this. You can see the typology of the rapture actually in Genesis 18, where Abraham actually meets with the Lord, and he's being an intercessor for Sodom and Gomorrah. He's like, if there's anybody righteous in there, what are you gonna do? If there's 50, if there's 40, etc. So Abraham is actually with the Lord in Genesis 18, talking with him. And where's Abraham in Genesis 19? He's not there. He's not in that chapter. He's with the Lord in Genesis 18. And so we are grafted into the Abrahamic covenant. And we are descendants of Abraham. There's a whole thing there. So actually, I should really edit this and add Genesis 18 with this theme. But Abraham's not, he doesn't go through what happens in Genesis 19. He's with the Lord in Genesis 18. They're talking with them. That's awesome. Okay, so Jacob works for 7 years and gets Leah first. Yep, there's some other points here. I should edit this too, actually. I just actually pulled up my file, and I haven't read this in a couple of months, and there's a bit of an improvement on this. Okay, so Jacob works for 7 years and gets Leah first. Okay, so quick little fix on this, actually. I think that Leah and Rachel both represent Israel, and at least the typology fits a little nicer here, because we've got this constant theme of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and Leah and Rachel are both responsible for birthing the tribes of Israel. And in Genesis 28, we see Jacob's ladder, and I believe that Jacob's ladder in Genesis 28 is actually a picture of the rapture. And then Jacob goes and meets Rachel, and he thinks he's working for Rachel, but he ends up getting Leah first. He ends up marrying them both right around the same week. He fulfills Leah's marriage week, and then he has Rachel, and then he continues to work an additional 7 years for Rachel while they start to have kids in and around the same time. Either way, there's a typology of 7, and I think that if I was to edit this, I would add Genesis 28 to this, and I think that the rapture is in Jacob's ladder there. So that's that. Okay, the next one is Joseph is elevated before the famine. Genesis 41, 40 through 43. He's the second in command over all the hosts and the people in Egypt. And so Joseph, being a type of Christ, or when we get grafted into be believers, we're going to rule and reign with Christ. So this is kind of a typology of the church. Joseph is elevated before famine, so too the church should be elevated before the famine. Makes sense. Typology there. The pattern is there. The next pattern, which is exactly the same idea as Joseph, Daniel is elevated before the furnace is heated 7 times. So Daniel is not in the furnace. He is elevated just as Joseph is elevated. Joseph is a type of the church here. Daniel would be a type of the church here, being elevated before the 7 times of the furnace being heated up. And the furnace was heated 7 times hotter. That was the request. There's some verses there for you. Daniel 2 and 3 and 4. Also, in Daniel 4, Nebuchadnezzar turns into a beast for how many years? Because of his pride, 7 years. How about that? The pattern's there. It's pretty awesome. Okay, next point. Enoch, who was taken, was 7th from Adam. Okay, yeah, so I mentioned that earlier. But yeah, that's interesting that Enoch is 7th from Adam. And Jude also responds to that and mentions that 7th from Adam. Jude also quotes something from the book of Enoch that is talking about the future judgment of Christ. So that's another big point. But again, Enoch was taken before the flood. Elijah was taken before the 7 years of famine. Okay, I said that earlier. That's good. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11, and 2 Kings 8, verse 2. That's kind of repetition. It's said in a different way there. Perfect. Okay, King David, a type of Christ, ruled Hebron for 7.5 years. Right. So, 2 Samuel 5:5, David ruled over Judah and Hebron for 7.5 years. 2 Samuel 5, verse 5, David ruled over all Israel 7.5 years later. So, there you go. You got this typology of Christ ruling over us for 7 years and then joining all the tribes or the two kingdoms together when he comes back at his second coming, which is kind of what David did there. That fits really good. And this is one reason why there might be a rapture gap, one reason why there might be a rapture and a bit of a gap before the tribulation starts because of this typology here. So, we're all guessing and speculating, but we could see that the final culmination in Ezekiel 33 and 37 about there's going to be one shepherd and one kingdom. He's going to gather everybody together, join them all together. That's perfect. Hosea 3 verse 5, in the latter days the Messiah will come through David. Yeah, perfect. Hosea 6:2, I believe, is talking directly to the two tribes of Israel. And the two tribes will become one, essentially, in the latter time at his second coming. And most people watching this video are familiar with the idea that, David is sort of right in the middle of the timeline. David died, it seems like he died right around 3,000 years from creation and 3,000 years from the potential second coming. However, if we're going to go soon, that kind of works out pretty good with that in mind. Okay, the next point, we're probably super close to point 30 or something like that. Jesus told us he will come again for us. This is in John 14, verse 3. That word is paralambano. I will receive you to myself. It's like an intimate word. It's like a marriage word. Matthew 24, when it's talking about one will be taken and one will be left. That's it. That's a word of like intimacy. If you're taken, that's actually a good word, and if you're left, that is a bad word. So taken as in paralambano, and Luke 17 uses the same word, paralambano. One will be taken, one will be left. And in Luke 17 it says it'll be like the days of Noah and Lot, and somewhat normal lifestyle. So life will not be normal by the second coming. People won't be marrying and building and planting and all those things that Luke 17 talks about. So it makes way more sense that when it's talking about paralambano, won't be taken as in raptured out before the judgment. The next point here is Jesus healed 7 times on the Sabbath. In the Gospels, we see that in Mark 1, he cast out an unclean spirit. In Matthew 12, he heals a man with a withered hand. In Mark 1, he heals Peter's mother-in-law. In Luke 13, he heals a woman with infirmity. Luke 14, he heals a man with dropsy. John 5, he heals a man with infirmity. John 9, he heals a blind man who, in turn, teaches the spiritually blind. So, Jesus healed 7 times on the Sabbath. 7 times on the Sabbath. I think he's trying to tell us something here. Keep in mind, the Sabbath is every 7 days. Why do we celebrate the Sabbath? Why do we remember it? It's because we're supposed to remember that God created this world in 7 days. But on the 7th day, he rested. So the whole purpose of the Sabbath is to remember God's creation and to remember that he created everything in 7 days. And on the 7th day, he rested. That's what the Sabbath is about. So what Jesus does is he comes in and he heals 7 times on the 7th day of the week. So a Sabbath is simply every 7 days, and that's another reason. Just the simple fact that a Sabbath happens every 7 days is another reason why it's 7 years. It's Daniel's 70th week. It's 7 days. It's that easy. Next point, in Revelation 14, I mean, there's lots of different perspectives on rapture and where it is, and interpretations vary, but my opinion and study has brought me to believe that Revelation is not specifically in order. You got to remember, John is looking at all these visions, and he's trying to document what he's seeing. He's seeing all these things in the sky. He's looking left, he's looking right. He's trying to make sense of everything. And so he's just kind of writing things as he sees them. So there is, of course, it's chronological from the beginning to the end of Revelation, but it's not necessarily in chronological order. And so the way I view this is Revelation 14 is the rapture when it talks about Son of Man with 1 crown coming on Rapture Day. I'll read that verse. And then I think Revelation 19 is talking about the second coming. So I'll read it. Revelation 14, 14 through 16. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. So remember, it's one crown. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. So he who sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. So he has one crown in Revelation 14, verse 14 in particular. But in Revelation 19, verse 12, it says this: his eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. He had a name written that no one knew except himself. So at his first arrival, he's got one crown. At his second coming, he's got many crowns. There's a difference there. And so I believe Revelation 14 is an example of the rapture. It sounds like a harvest. Perfect. Revelation 19, many crowns. Sounds like judgment. Okay, the next point, churches are the lampstands and present before the seals are open. So again, this supports that we are there before the seals are open, and we're there before this tribulation starts or Jacob's trouble starts. And I'll read some of those verses. It kind of makes sense to go a little bit backwards. Revelation 5 verse 6 says, and I looked, and behold, in the midst of the throne and of the four living creatures, and in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb as though it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God, sent out into all the earth. Well, 7 spirits, go to Revelation 4 verse 5, and from the throne proceeded lightnings, thunderings, and voices. 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. So Revelation 4 verse 6 tells us that the 7 spirits of God are with the Lamb when he opens the seals. Okay, so what are the 7 spirits of God? Go to Revelation 1:20. The mystery of the 7 stars which you saw in my right hand are the 7 golden lampstands. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands which you saw are the 7 churches. So the 7 spirits of God are the 7 churches that are with him when he opens the seals there. So I think that's perfect. That's a big one right there. We're there when he opens the seals. Next point, we're probably around 32 or 33, somewhere in the 30s. 7-day Galilean wedding. There's a lot of verses on that, but most people are familiar with this, so I don't need to go on this too much. But there's Galilean weddings are known to be 7 days. Matthew 9:15, Jesus calls himself the bridegroom. Ephesians 5:22 through 33, the church is viewed as the bride. 2 Corinthians 11 verse 2, the church is viewed as the bride. Matthew 26 through 29, Christ's proposal to the church when he's doing his last supper with his disciples, when he was offering the cup of wine and in his bread, he was saying, for this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. So he's kind of proposing in a way to humanity at his Lord's Supper. Isn't that something? John 14:3, again, that word is paralambano. We see that same word in Matthew 24, paralambano, G3880. And he'll be taken in an intimate way to the bridegroom. Revelation 22 verse 17, the Spirit and the bride say, come. It's kind of a little bit of a joke. Would you beat your bride before the wedding day? Probably not. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't beat my bride before the wedding day. I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't do that. And if Jesus is a good father and a good man, I don't think he's going to be doing that. I certainly wouldn't. So the Spirit and the bride say, come. He calls himself the bridegroom. Think of him as the character of Boaz. Boaz was a very gracious and kind man to Ruth. In the story of Ruth, Boaz didn't say, hey, Ruth, you can pick all the grains in the field, but just can you go over there just for about 7 hours? I'm just going to get my belt and my whip. I'm just going to whip you for 7 days, and then we'll get married. Okay, I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to, can you just, yeah, let me just, no. That was not Boaz. He was a very kind, gentle man, and he didn't do that. And so we see that typology there. Okay, the next point here is 1 day equals 1,000 years to the Lord. So a lot of people are familiar with that. 2 Peter 3 verse 8, a day is like 1,000 years. Psalm 90 verse 4 is another reference to 1,000 years, like a day. Psalm 84 is verse 10, better is 1 day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. The interesting thing about Psalm 84 is what we're looking at currently right now is potentially looking at Psalm 84 as when Israel turns 84, that could be the year of the second coming. And so 1948 plus 84 could put us right in the ballpark of 2032 time frame, which is kind of really perfect typology here. So I'm not quite sure about year. That's just a speculation, and who knows. But it talks about better is it 1 day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. It really, when you read the psalm, it really speaks of the second coming right there. But we'll move on from that point. The next point is 7 means oath in Hebrew. 7 means oath. It's like a promise or to swear. And so that's where that Strong's number is H7651. And I'm just going to pull it up on my computer so I can read it and make sure I'm reading this properly. It's called the Strongs will say it's Shiba, but I think you should actually pronounce it as Sheva, because there's no dot in that bet, in that Hebrew word bet, so it's Sheva. So I think we get our word 7 from Sheva, or Sheva. 7 is Sheva. It means week, or 7, or oath. So it's kind of hard to look at this word that means 7, which means promise or an oath or to swear, and just ignore that. So 7 is a big deal to our Father. And then there's more 7 patterns. We're probably around 0.36 or something like that. But Genesis 1 and 2, 7-day pattern in creation week. Exodus 23 verse 12, there's 7 days in a week. The pattern's there. Exodus 23, 10 through 12, there's 7 years in a sabbatical year. So every 7 years there's supposed to be a Shemitah cycle. The Shemitah cycles are 7 years, not anything else. Leviticus 25 verse 8, there's 7 Sabbaths of years in a Jubilee cycle. So 7 sevens, 7 times 7. Revelation 1 verse 20, there are 7 lampstands, or in other words, there are 7 churches. Revelation 5 verse 1, there are 7 seals. Revelation 8 verse 1, there's 7 trumpets. Revelation 16, there's 7 bowls. Leviticus 23, there's 7 feasts of the Lord. Okay, there's not 8. There's 7 feasts of the Lord. Okay, so in Leviticus 23, it's talking about 7 feasts of the Lord, not 8. Now, there's other feasts that we can talk about, but his core 7 are 7. Leviticus 23 verse 6, 7 days for unleavened bread. Leviticus 23 verse 34, 7 days for the Feast of Tabernacles. Feast of Tabernacles we're right around the end of Feast of Tabernacles, so a few more days and that'll be officially done at this time of the recording. 2 Chronicles 30 verse 21, there's 7 days for Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then there's a 7-day extension for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Matthew 18, 7 times to forgive? No, 70 times 7. Jeremiah 29, you're going to go into captivity for 70 years. Daniel 9, 70 weeks of years. Daniel, I'm going to tell you about something. It's going to be a prophecy of 490 years, but it's going to be 483 years until we get to Christ, and then there's going to be a final 7 at the end. 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7 7. Okay. The Torah code, divisible by 7. Equidistant letters skip. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It spells Torah every 50th letter in Genesis chapter 1. It spells Torah every 50 letters in Exodus chapter 1. It spells Yod-He Vav-He every 8th letter in chapter 1. It spells Torah backwards every 50 letters in Numbers chapter 1. It spells Torah backwards every 49 letters in Deuteronomy chapter 1. You multiply all those together, you get 49 million, which is divisible by 7. Ain't that something? Next pattern, 7 patterns in Genesis chapter 1. Oh, by the way, Torah backwards means behold Ruth. It's hey Ruth. Torah backwards is behold Ruth. That's amazing. I talked about that before, so I won't overdo that point. But Torah backwards means behold Ruth. 7 patterns in Genesis 1:1. Number of Hebrew words. There's 7 Hebrew words in Genesis 1:1. 7. Point number 2. The number of letters equals 28. So 28 letters in Genesis 1:1. That's divisible by 7. The first 3 Hebrew words contain 14 letters. Well, that's divisible by 7. The last 4 Hebrew words contain 14 letters. Okay, well, that's divisible by 7. The 4th and the 5th words have 7 letters. Okay, well, that's divisible by 7. The 6th and the 7th words have 7 letters. Okay, number 7. The 3 key words, God, heaven, and earth, have 14 letters. Divisible by 7. The 3 key words, God, heaven, and earth, have a Hebrew value of 7, 7, 7. How about that? The number of letters in the 4 remaining words is also 14, which is divisible by 7. The Hebrew value of the second word is 203, which is divisible by 7. The sum of the first and last letters of each word is 1393, divisible by 7. The sum of the first and last letters in the first and last words is 497. Now, if you guys don't know anything about Hebrew, every Hebrew letter has a value. So you have to go back and check out some other videos on that. But, and this is actually nothing crazy. Like Hebrew letters literally have values. Okay, point number 13. The sum of the first and last letter in the first half of the verse is 42, divisible by 7. The sum of the first and last letter in the second half of the verse is 91, divisible by 7. The sum of the first, middle, and last letters is 133, divisible by 7. Hebrew value of all 7 words is 2,701. Well, we got prime numbers, 37 times 73. They're mirror images of each other, and that's what that value is. Whoops. I wrote the same thing twice. I got to fix that too. But we shall meet him in the clouds. 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 through 18. We are caught up to be harpazoed, and so therefore we should comfort each other with these words. I'll do a little edit later, but you guys get the idea. We can do this. We could do this all day, but there's the theme of the 7s. There's the theme. It's everywhere. It's all over the place. And so if you're wondering, does the rapture happen before the 7 years? I really hope you watch this video. If you know anybody that has these questions, please pass this video along to them and share it with them. And just want to say thanks for hanging out on this live stream. Again, if you'd like to support the channel, the links are below. If you want to hang out with the God a Minute community, there's so many friends on the chat. Thanks for hanging out. It's an awesome community that's in our Discord where we do voice chats and study. And that's about it, guys. I love you guys very much. Hopefully this blesses you, and I'll keep it right around here. Keep it around the 1 hour mark so it's shareable and it's watchable and people dig into it. If you really understand this and study it, you'll enjoy it. And you'll be like, okay, he's coming, and he's coming before the 7 years. I'm excited. I'm blessed. Therefore, comfort each other with these words. Love you guys very much. Thanks for chatting. Go, Jesus, go. One day closer. Hope to see you in the clouds soon, guys. Until then, let's keep on telling people about Jesus. Adios, muchachos.